My name is Margaret Ashworth. I'm 33 years old. The first thing I heard when I woke up from a 3-week coma was my stepmother's voice saying one word so quietly I almost missed it. Finally, I didn't open my eyes. Some instinct stopped me before my mind had even caught up with where I was. The hospital smell. The beep of machines. The particular silence of a room where people are kept alive by equipment instead of their own strength. I lay still. My stepmother stepped closer to the bed. Then she said something else. Something meant only for the person standing beside her, in the voice people use when they're sure no one who matters can hear. My father didn't tell her to stop. That was the moment I understood the car accident wasn't the most dangerous thing that had happened to me that month. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Before we go further, drop your first name and your state in the comments. I want to know who's listening tonight. Let me take you back to before that hospital room, because you need to know who I was before I tell you what they tried to take from me. My mother, Diane Ashworth, died of pancreatic cancer when I was 15. She wasn't famous or wealthy in any flashy sense. She was a commercial property investor in Charleston, South Carolina, small office buildings, retail strips, the kind of real estate that doesn't make headlines but quietly builds wealth over decades if you're patient and careful. She did this for almost 20 years. She was meticulous. She kept records the way a surgeon keeps notes, not out of habit, but because she understood that precision was protection, and that protection was for the people who'd come after her. When she died, she left me 4 commercial properties and shares in her small investment company, all placed in a trust that wouldn't fully activate until I turned 25. She also left a letter, sealed, given to me by her attorney on my 25th birthday. In it, she wrote that she hadn't built these protections because she didn't trust me. She built them because she did trust me, and she wanted that trust honored by the structure around me, even if the people around me couldn't be. My father, Walter Ashworth, is 60 now. He remarried 3 years after my mother died to a woman named Renee, who was 42 when I met her, polished, warm, the kind of person who instantly understands what a room needs and gives it to them without seeming to try. Renee was kind to me at every dinner. She asked about school. She remembered small details, and in my last year of high school, she started asking gently, casually about my mother's properties, about the trust, about how it was structured. My godmother, Patricia Lowe, noticed before I did. She'd been my mother's best friend since college and was a retired estate attorney, one of the people who'd helped draft my mother's trust. She met Renee once and called me the next day. Be careful of her questions, she said. She's just interested, I told her. That's exactly what worries me, Patricia said. I didn't understand. Not then. I'd understand 4 years later, in a hospital bed. I turned 25 the spring before the accident. I activated the trust. I met with Eleanor, the trust's independent financial manager, who'd been quietly overseeing everything since my mother's death. The properties were intact. The company shares had grown. The investment account had become more than I expected, enough that I sat there for a full minute just absorbing the number. Renee's questions changed after that. Less casual. More specific. About the properties. About the company's leadership. About whether I'd thought of updating the management arrangements now that I controlled everything. I told my father. He said, "She just cares about you, Maggie." I let it go. Then, in October, I was driving home from a property inspection on a 2-lane highway outside town. A truck ran a red light at an intersection where I had the right of way. I don't remember the impact. I remember light, and then nothing until a hospital room. 3 weeks later. The doctors told me afterward I'd been in a coma for most of those 3 weeks, and that in the final days, my brain had been showing signs of returning awareness. What they didn't fully explain, what I learned for myself, is that during that time, people had been talking around me freely. Visitors, nurses, my father, Renee, and my body had been listening the whole time. I woke up slowly that Thursday morning, sound first, then light through my eyelids, then the slow return of thought. I knew exactly where I was before I opened my eyes. Then the door opened. 2 sets of footsteps. Renee's? By the sound of her heels, I'd know that sound after 15 years. My father's. Heavier. Slower. The door clicked shut behind them. Renee walked to my bed. She looked at the monitors. Then she said, so quietly I almost missed it. Finally, I kept my eyes closed. I controlled my breathing like my life depended on it, because some part of me already understood that it might. Renee turned to my father and said 7 words I have counted 100 times since. "One more signature, and it's all ours." My father said nothing. That silence told me everything. I lay there, and I listened. The nurse came in for vitals. Her name, I'd later learn, was Tasha. She checked my pulse, and her fingers lingered on my wrist, just a half-second longer than they needed to. She'd noticed something. Renee and my father left at 11:40. I waited 20 minutes. Then I opened my eyes. I had about 20 hours before someone named Hargrove arrived with what Renee had called the full transfer documents. I needed two things. Someone in this hospital who understood what was happening, and a way to reach Patricia before morning. When Tasha came back for evening vitals, I pressed her wrist once, deliberately as she checked my pulse. She went still. Then, in the same calm, clinical voice, she said, "I'm going to check your temperature," and leaned close enough to whisper, "Blink once if you can hear me." I blinked. She told me, quietly, that she'd noticed signs of awareness for 2 days and had been keeping private notes not in the main chart, because she didn't know who to trust. She told me a woman who wasn't on my approved visitor list had come 3 times with a man who looked like an attorney, and that Renee had once asked them to leave when my father showed up. I couldn't speak yet, but I could write. Tasha brought a notepad. I wrote 2 things. Patricia's name, and her phone number memorized at 14. Never forgotten. Then one more word. "Tonight. I'll call her from my personal phone," Tasha said. Not the hospital line. Patricia arrived at 8:18 that night. She took my hand. I squeezed it. She told me everything in 11 minutes, because that's how long we had. Renee had filed for temporary medical power of attorney on day 4, citing my father's request. The hospital's legal team had flagged it, but my father confirmed it in writing, and it was approved on a limited basis. On day 9, an attorney named Hargrove, who Renee had quietly hired 18 months earlier, filed paperwork requesting an emergency review of the trust's management, citing my incapacity and my father's standing as original co-trustee. Eleanor, the trust's financial manager, had rejected it and called Patricia immediately. She'd been stalling for 10 days requesting documents, asking for clarifications, buying time without anyone else realizing it. Hargrove was coming at 9 a.m., with what Renee called the final transfer documents. "What do you want to do?" Patricia asked. I opened my eyes. "Hargrove can't walk into this building tomorrow." "He won't," she said. By midnight, Tasha's signed, time-stamped notes documented my awareness. Eleanor had formal medical confirmation from 2 witnesses. Patricia had filed an emergency motion with the probate court requesting a freeze on all trust transactions pending a capacity review. A medical legal attorney named Robert Hale was on his way, arriving by 6 a.m. At 7:15 the next morning, Hale told me the attending physician was filing an amended capacity assessment time-stamped, current that would override everything Renee's filing had relied on. The moment it was filed, Renee's power of attorney became invalid automatically. No court order needed. And Patricia's motion? Received by the court at 11:47 the night before. A judge had reviewed it at 4 a.m. and frozen every trust account pending an emergency hearing Monday morning. Hargrove arrived at 9:04 with Renee. They opened the door together. Renee saw my open eyes, the water glass on my table, Patricia sitting beside me with a folder on her lap, Hale standing by the window. "Good morning, Renee," I said. She went pale. "You're awake. Since Thursday afternoon," I said. "I heard you. You and my father." Hargrove understood before she did. He was a lawyer, and he read the room in about 4 seconds. The folder under his arm wasn't going anywhere. "The accounts are frozen," I said. "The power of attorney is invalid as of this morning's assessment. There's a hearing Monday." He asked to speak with his client privately. They left. My father didn't come that day. He came the next morning, alone, and sat in the chair Patricia had left empty. He looked at his hands for a long time before he spoke. "I knew what Renee was planning," he said. "Not every detail, but the direction of it. I told myself she was just curious. By the time you turned 25, I knew that wasn't true. I let myself keep not knowing, because admitting it meant I'd have to do something I wasn't willing to do." "Leave her," I said. "Yes. You chose her instead." "Yes." I asked him to tell the truth at Monday's hearing, everything. He asked if that would be used against Renee. "Probably against you too," I said. He nodded. "I'll be there." The hearing lasted 3 hours. My father testified to everything, the documents he'd signed, the conversations with Hargrove, the timeline. It cost him. It was also, I think, the most honest he'd been in years. The court reviewed Hargrove's transfer paperwork and found what Patricia already suspected. My mother's trust had a 3rd-tier authorization requirement, a signature from the trust's named independent counsel. That role belonged to Patricia. Renee and Hargrove either hadn't known, or thought it could be bypassed. It couldn't. The transfer had never been legally possible. The court froze all pending transactions, invalidated Renee's power of attorney retroactively, and referred the case to the district attorney. My father was removed as co-trustee. I became sole controlling trustee. Renee was arrested 4 months later. The investigation found Hargrove had drafted forged authorization documents that were never used because the window closed first. He surrendered his law license. Renee's frozen assets included a new car and jewelry bought in the weeks after my accident purchases made in anticipation of money that was never going to be hers. My father settled civilly, repaying funds he'd drawn from the trust during that period. He lives alone now. Renee left before the arrest. She'd already calculated he was no longer useful to her. 8 months later, I sat in Eleanor's office for my first quarterly review as sole trustee. Everything had held. Everything had grown. That weekend, Patricia came for dinner. I cooked the way my mother taught me, slow, careful. We talked about her for hours. Near the end, Patricia told me something I hadn't known. A week before she died, my mother called her for 3 hours to go over the trust documents one more time. She added one new requirement that day, the third-tier authorization. The one that ended up saving everything. She didn't know exactly what was coming, but she knew enough to add one more layer. In the last week of her life. For a 14-year-old daughter who wouldn't understand why it mattered for almost 20 years. So here's what I want to leave you with. My mother spent her last weeks on the phone with attorneys, adding clauses to documents, building protections she hoped I'd never need but refused to leave unfinished. Real protection isn't a locked door or a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's one clause, added in a 3-hour phone call by a dying woman who understood that the people most likely to hurt you are the ones closest to you when you're least able to defend yourself. And Tasha, she had no reason to notice me. No obligation to act. She did it anyway, because she paid attention, and because something told her it mattered. Pay attention to the people in your life who notice things and act on it without being asked. They're rarer than you think, and more valuable than almost anyone else around you. Tell me in the comments your first name, your state, and whether you've ever had someone in your corner who didn't have to be. If this story moved you, subscribe. Every story here is about someone who was counted out and turned out to be the one person no one accounted for. I'll see you in the next one.